Week 10 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few kickers I would start this week. The first guy, Graham Gano of the New York Giants. Graham Gano, he was dropped in a lot of fantasy leagues last week with the bye week. But now the Giants obviously back in action versus the Houston Texans, who give up the 10th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So Graham Gano, one of the better kickers in fantasy football this season, because he's on an offense that don't finish a lot of drives in the end zone. And the last few weeks here for Graham Gano, week 5 at Green Bay 10. Week 6 versus Baltimore 6, Week 7 at Jacksonville 11, and Week 8 at Seattle 8. So right now, pretty much anywhere from 8 to 10 fantasy points for the most part you're going to get out of Graham Gano. And like I said, this Texan team, they give a lot of points up on the board this season here. And I think the Giants will be in the red zone a decent amount of times. And I think Gano has a good one in this one. And he's a kicker I would start. The next guy, Jason Sanders of the Miami Dolphins. So Sanders, I know the numbers don't jump off the page here for him, but this week here a few things are going in his way for Sanders, in my opinion. It's a home game. He's on a high-powered offense, no doubt about it, in the Miami Dolphins, and he's a guy that we know the last couple seasons has been pretty decent. 2 years ago, top 5 in fantasy points at the kicking position, and this week versus the Cleveland Browns, I think he got a decent ball game. So the last few games here for Sanders: Week 7 versus Pittsburgh 11, Week 8 at Detroit 8, Week 9 at Chicago 5, and right now Week 10, I think this Cleveland team can make a few stops where they're going to have to settle for field goals, but also obviously we could see the Dolphins score at least 3 or 4 touchdowns in this one. But right here, I like Jason Sanders this week, and he's available right now in 77% of fantasy leagues as well. The next guy, Matt Gay, Los Angeles Rams. So Matt Gay last week had a nice bounce back game, and this week here, a good matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals that give up the 9th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So in week 3 at Arizona, he did have 8 fantasy points. The last few games here for Gay: week 4 at the 49ers 7, week 5 versus Dallas 3, week 6 versus Carolina 5, week 8 versus San Francisco 2, and week 9 at Tampa Bay 6. So right here, good matchup on paper. This Ram team, they got to find ways to score, at least get in the red zone. And this week here, it's a home game, which is always a good thing for a kicker, and obviously an opposing offense. So right now, I think this week anywhere from 7 to 10 fantasy points is a possibility. And with Matt Gay as well, he's available in a decent amount of fantasy leagues at 51%. And I would give him a start this week. The next kicker, Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks. So Jason Myers, he's been a good kicker this season and top 5 in fantasy points at the kicking position. So right now, Myers, he's going out there and a minimum 8 to 12 fantasy points. It's been each and every week. Week 7 at the Chargers 16, week 8 versus the Giants 11, and week 9 at Arizona 8. So right here in week 10 versus Tampa Bay in Germany, I think this ball game could be a high-scoring game where you throw all the defense out the window after traveling far. And these are 2 pretty solid offenses, especially Seattle this season, led by Geno Smith, getting the football down the field. He's got 2 good receivers in Lockett and DK Metcalf. And Myers, each and every week, he's getting minimum 2 or 3 field goal attempts with the extra points on top of it. So this week here, a little bit more of the same. And he's a kicker I would start this week. In the 5th and final kicker is Harrison Butker of the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, Butker's in a high-powered offense. He came off injury a few weeks ago. Here's Harrison Butker. And I know last week it wasn't a good game for him with only 2 fantasy points. If you play point extras, missed. So right now, he missed the PAT, which was -2 in my fantasy leagues. Here is Harrison Butker for this Kansas City Chiefs team. But the last couple games before that, week 6 versus Buffalo 11, week 7 at San Francisco 6, and week 9 versus Tennessee 2 fantasy points. And right here, week 10, decent matchup versus the Jaguars, where I think this Chiefs team is going to be living in the red zone early and often in this game. I wouldn't be surprised if they put up anywhere from 30 to 40 points total on the board. I know the Titans last week only held them down to 20, but this week here, I think Harrison Butker bounces back, and it's a good matchup, and he's a kicker I would start this week. So that's a few kickers I would start here for week 10 of the fantasy football season.